Good evening, and thank you for taking the time to join us on this eve of Holocaust Memorial Day. I'm Reynold Rosenberg, Chair of the Hertford Interfaith Forum, and first I'd like to welcome the Lord Lieutenant of Hertfordshire, Robert Voss, who will be addressing us later. The Hertfordshire Interfaith Forum seeks to unite the faiths across the county. And while the Holocaust is essentially a crime against the Jewish faith, all faiths are actually threatened. We know there are many events that have been organised by districts and boroughs in the county, and we are much heartened by this. Here's an overview of the events for tomorrow. If you see your locality, do try and contact the organisers for links, or go to the events if you can. So, 77 years after the end of the last day of living hell in Auschwitz-Birkenau, let us remind ourselves of the enormity of the crimes and remember the later genocides. Here's Olivia Marks Waldman, Chief Executive of Holocaust Memorial Day Trust.
Hello, I'm Olivia Marks Waldman, Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and I'm delighted you're attending this event. You are taking part in one of thousands of activities taking place across the UK to mark Holocaust Memorial Day in schools, prisons, libraries, and civic ceremonies. Holocaust Memorial Day is an international day of remembrance to commemorate the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust and the millions more murdered under Nazi persecution and in the genocides that followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. The 27th of January is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the most notorious concentration and extermination camp. Together, we bear witness for all those who were murdered, and we honour the survivors of those regimes and all those whose lives were changed beyond recognition. And there is still much to do to make sure we can live in a world that is free from identity-based persecution and hostility. By the end of this event, I hope that you will all know more about what happened in the past and that you will understand the impact that it had on the individuals who were persecuted, and that you will go on to take action. You can find more at our website on hmd.org.uk. I will leave you with the words of Sir Nicholas Winton, who rescued 669 children from Nazi-occupied Europe. He said, "Do not be content in your life just to do no wrong. Be prepared every day to try and do some good." Thank you for taking part in Holocaust Memorial Day and for taking the time to learn from genocide for a better future.
So, how do we get to Auschwitz? How did it come to be there? Let me take you on a short overview of the road to hell. We start 150 years before the birth of Christ. The tiny Jewish enclave of Israel, Judea, and Samaria were beset by superpowers of the time. Babylon had already destroyed the first temple, and the second temple had been built. The Greeks, the Assyrians, were trying to force the Jewish population to worship their gods, but without success. Then came Rome. And Rome also did not succeed in changing Jewish beliefs, but they had the power to destroy the second temple and exile the population. Two paths were followed. One northwards across Turkey to western Russia and Eastern Europe, and another across the north of Africa into Spain. And not far behind them came the new religion of Christianity, which rapidly took hold of European leaders, and before long most of Europe were Christian. And there came a third religion out of that area, Islam. The new followed the same paths that they settled in Spain and Turkey, and things were relatively peaceful for 500 years or so. And then Christianity viewed Judaism as an affront to their Christian beliefs and demanded conversion or expulsion, or worse. A series of expulsions began with England in 1290, France in 1310, and Spain and Portugal in 1492 and then 1498. The Jewish population was forced eastwards. And then things settled for another 400 years, until Russia started a series of pogroms forcing their Jewish population into Poland and Germany, or if you were lucky, like my granddad, to England. And then came the Great War. Germany lost, and the Treaty of Versailles imposed a huge debt on Germany, bankrupting the country and oppressing the people with huge inflation. America tried to help, but in 1929 it had its own problems, so Germany came up with a new leader. Adolf Hitler in 1933 became Chancellor, and the National Socialists offered a new discipline and a scapegoat: the Jews. The Jews, Hitler said, were behind an international conspiracy to attain world domination, and part of that conspiracy was to let Germany lose the war. It didn't matter that 100,000 Jews fought for Germany in the war, and 12,000 of those were killed. Didn't matter at all, because the new science of genetics had showed that Jews were actually less than human, Untermensch, spoiling the pure Aryan stock. They were vermin. Exterminate them. This is a common theme in genocides: reduce your victims to a lowly status. So between 1933 and 1938, Jews were denied citizens' rights. They were barred from politics, teaching, medicine, or the law. They were vermin. They were not allowed in public places like libraries and parks, and they began to be arrested and sent to concentration camps like Dachau, which was opened as early as 1933. And on the night of November the 10th, 1938, Hitler Youth were given the freedom to vandalize synagogues across Germany and set them on fire. Jewish shops were looted and any Jew on the street was attacked. 24 Jews were murdered that night, and the police did nothing to stop the destruction. Indeed, the next day, they forced the Jews to clean up the mess while the crowds laughed and mocked them. Clearly, it was imperative to get out of Germany. So a special train was arranged to save the children, many of whom would never see their parents again. Now we have the testimony of Bea Green. She was, and I hesitate to use the word, one of the luckier ones, in that she did actually reunite with her parents, but still, it was not a pleasant experience.
Well, I was born in Munich, in the capital of Bavaria. I had a bigger brother who was not always my delight because being 4 years older than me, he liked teasing me. Apart from that, I had a nanny and she used to take me for a walk to the nearest little park. And then I went to kindergarten. And then at the age of 6, I started school. So I was there from 6 to 7, at 7 to 8. And that's when they beat up my dad. Hitler had come to power by then, a few weeks before. And my parents took me out of this regular state primary school and put me into the Jewish school. From the moment that Hitler came to power and the incident with my dad occurred, I think I knew that I was in the category that wasn't just Bavarian, that my identity was more obviously being Jewish and different from other Bavarians. Well, it was the 10th of March, 1933, which happened to be a day I was in bed with a little cold, nothing serious. And I heard the front door of our fourth floor flat banging shut, thinking it was my mum coming home from shopping and that she'd come and say hello to me, but nobody came in. Thought it was a bit odd, so I got up, opened the door to the corridor, which was opposite the bathroom, outside which were pegs that my dad always hung his clothes on. And sure enough, there was my father's suit, but it was covered in blood, which for an 8-year-old was a shock, as you can imagine. So I tiptoed down the corridor, knocked at my parents' bedroom door, opened it, and just saw my father pulling up his bedclothes so I shouldn't see his face. So I went back to bed and I lay there, I guess in sort of shock, because I couldn't understand what was going on. After that, a doctor came, and then we went to our little house in the village called Walchensee, where my dad recovered. But nobody ever told me anything. I think they tried to protect me. I think leaving Munich at midnight, for me at first, was a real adventure. I mean, it was midnight, it was my fellow cooks and my mum and my dad and my uncle with a camera. And then, of course, the time came and the train left. And it was a steam train, so it moved out very, very, very slowly. But I still saw my mum step behind my dad and dab her eyes. So, but she hoped that I would not see her cry. And that was the first time that the separation hit me. You know, up to then, it was me getting on the train, great fun. You know, I was going to England, I knew where I was going. There were no uncertainties at that point. But when I saw my mum cry, I think it was then that the fact was that I was going to be on my own. And I was met by, I guess, what looked to me like an elderly, probably just a middle-aged lady, in a purple suit. Now, why that struck me, and I can see it now. And she greeted me by giving me her hand and said, "How do you do?" And I took her hand and I gave a little curtsy, which is what one did in my time, in my place. And I said, yes. So that was my first use of English in the UK. You know, they were very nice and very helpful. But it was being thrown into the English pool at the deep end. What I really, really, really wanted, and we're now talking about first week of July, I wanted to go to school. And I was really, really keen to learn English quickly and well. And I said to myself in German, ich werde diese Sprache bemeistern. I shall master this language. And I think I have. I love English. So there was a magazine called Picture Post, and this was one of the pictures. And it wound up in our common room. And I picked it up, turned the pages, and came across my dad. I had not been in contact with my parents. I cried, and Miss Borner, who was supervising prep, took us both to the headmistress's drawing room and said to her, "Oh, she says that this is her father." And the headmistress looked at it and then looked down at me over it and then looked again and then said, "That is not your father. That is propaganda." I did not argue with her. That was the first time, when I was all of 14 years old, I realized that people could not understand what had gone on and what was going on in Germany.
And now, in more detail, a review of the Holocaust and of the genocides that followed.
The 27th of January is Holocaust Memorial Day, the International Day of Remembrance for the victims and survivors of the Holocaust, Nazi persecution and subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda and Darfur. It gives us an opportunity to reflect on the consequences of discrimination and persecution and learn the lessons of the past.
Between 1941 and 1945, the Nazis attempted to annihilate all of Europe's Jews. This systematic and planned genocide is known as the Holocaust. From the time they assumed power in 1933, the Nazis used propaganda, persecution and legislation to deny human and civil rights to Jews. Jews were denied citizenship, forbidden to marry non-Jews, to own businesses and to live in certain areas. The Nazis used centuries of anti-Semitism as their foundation. Nazi persecution extended beyond Jewish people, political opponents, the Roma and Sinti people, disabled people, gay people, Jehovah's Witnesses, Freemasons, and black people were all targeted, and hundreds of thousands of people were murdered. By the end of the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish people had been murdered in ghettos, mass shootings, concentration camps, and extermination camps.
I was 16-year-old when we arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Within minutes, I got separated from my mother and 2 sisters. A few minutes later, I got separated from my father. I had no opportunity to say goodbye to them. And from that day onwards, I never saw them again.
After Auschwitz, Eugene was imprisoned at the Buchenwald concentration camp. He was forced to work in the tunnels at the Dora Mittelbau labor camp and was finally imprisoned in the concentration camp at Bergen-Belsen.
The scenes in Bergen-Belsen were terrible. There were dead bodies lying all over. The place was infected by typhus. I personally came down to 5 stone.
For 50 years, Eugene said nothing of his ordeals, but now he speaks regularly about the atrocities that he experienced in his youth. In doing so, he has joined a group of survivors who work extremely hard to make sure that the Holocaust will never be forgotten.
I've been speaking to universities, colleges, schools for 65 years, ever since I came over to this country in 1946. I've made numerous films about the Holocaust, particularly about Auschwitz, about my time on the death march, and I have even taken some neo-Nazis back to the camp. It is very important that people understand what happened and learn something from what happened in the past, because we have no guarantee today that it cannot happen again. We believe it can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Sadly, in the years that have passed since the end of the Holocaust, the world has seen genocide take place again and again. In the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge systematically evicted the population of Cambodia from its towns and cities and forced everyone to work on huge collective farms. Anyone who refused or moved too slowly was killed.
For 3 years, 8 months and 20 days, we were forced to labor, to work in the rice field, from sunrise to sunset, with only 2 bowls of rice soup a day. Jenny, my daughter, was 9 when she died, and she died of starvation because I had not enough rice to give to her. To look at your daughter slowly dying of starvation, this is really hard for a mother, and I will never forget this.
In Cambodia, the number of people murdered reached 2 million. In Rwanda, using little more than clubs and machetes, members of the Hutu people massacred almost 1 million men, women, children and babies who belonged to either the Tutsi people or moderate Hutus.
It was 10 o'clock in the morning when the militias come to attack in our house, and I managed to escape, just jumping through the window, but my family could make it. I climbed the tree, which was in the backyard. I could hear the sound of crying and mourning inside the house. But unfortunately, a few minutes later, those sounds had stopped. That's when I knew everybody was dead.
In former Yugoslavia, the Serbs targeted Bosnia in their wish for political domination. They were prepared to achieve this by isolating and even exterminating ethnic groups.
I was taken away together with my brother and the rest of the villagers, and I ended up in the Yamarska concentration camp. During my stay in the Yamarska camp, I was treated worse than a rat. My life was worth less than life of a rat. The worst aspect of being kept in the Yamarska camp was the fact that the place was guarded by my former schoolmates, former neighbors, former policemen whose protection I relied before the war, and even former teachers.
But lessons remain unlearned. Genocide is still taking place today. Right now, in the Darfur region of Sudan, against a backdrop of civil war and with the backing of the Sudanese government, members of the Arab population are currently persecuting black African farmers who they see as inferior people. To date, millions of people have been displaced and hundreds of thousands of men, women and children have been murdered in Darfur. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we have a chance to think about what we can do to put an end to persecution and discrimination.
My hope for the Holocaust Memorial Day is for the people to learn about the genocide so that it won't happen again.
The more people commemorate the Holocaust on Holocaust Memorial Day, the more awareness there will be of the dangers and the more people will learn.
I hope that the Holocaust Memorial Day can inspire people, especially young people, to understand that they can make a difference, that one person can make a difference.
I want to ask the young people, as they are the decision makers of the future, to learn.
This year's theme is one day. And we think of this in different ways. There's one day I will never forget, the 27th of January 1945. One day at a time was the way to survive in the camps. Yesterday had gone and we daren't contemplate tomorrow. All we can do is survive today. And one day, hopefully, we will learn from genocide to build a better future. And the way to do that is to never forget, always remember. I'd like at this point to take a minute's silence. Thank you. The Holocaust Memorial Day was created on the 27th of January 2000, and representatives of 46 governments met in Stockholm to discuss Holocaust education, remembrance and research. At the end of the meeting, all attendees signed a declaration committing to preserve the memory of those who were murdered in the Holocaust and subsequent genocides. These are the statements of commitment adopted from that declaration. We recognise that the Holocaust shook the foundations of modern civilization. Its unprecedented character and horror will always hold universal meaning. We believe the Holocaust must have a permanent place in our nation's collective memory. We honour the survivors still with us and reaffirm our shared goals of mutual understanding and justice. We must make sure that future generations understand the causes of the Holocaust and reflect upon its consequences. We vow to remember the victims of Nazi persecution and of all genocides. We value the sacrifice of those who have risked their lives to protect or rescue victims as a touchstone of the human capacity for good in the face of evil. We recognise that humanity is still scarred by the belief that race, religion, disability or sexuality makes some people's lives worth less than others. Genocide, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia and discrimination still continue. We have a shared responsibility to fight these evils. We pledge to strengthen our efforts to promote education and research about the Holocaust and other genocides. We will do our utmost to make sure that the lessons of such events are fully learned. We will continue to encourage Holocaust remembrance by holding an annual Holocaust Memorial Day. We condemn the evils of prejudice, discrimination and racism. We value a free, respectful and democratic society. And just before I call upon the Lord Lieutenant, I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking all of you for coming, and to the Herts County Council for all the help I've had in the background. It's my pleasure and honour to introduce Robert Voss.
Thank you very much, Reynold, and good evening to everybody. One day is the theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day, and I've been asked to try and bring together some of the themes and then look into the future a little bit. This has a very personal impact on me, apart from being Her Majesty's Lord Lieutenant and therefore Her Majesty's personal representative in the county. I'm also the son of 2 refugees who escaped Nazi Germany and arrived in this country in mid-1939, sadly leaving my grandparents behind, who perished in Sobibor death camp, together with 61 other relatives. So Holocaust Memorial Day is very significant as far as I'm concerned and has a hugely personal impact. And we heard Olivia Marks-Waldman say that there was an impact on individuals persecuted. I would like to say that there's an individual on many more than that. And when one hears of 6 million Jews being murdered in the Holocaust, so many more died. My father died aged 50. Obviously from a broken heart. His sister died aged 50 from a broken heart. His brother died aged 50 from a broken heart. So it affects many more, and it affects so many of us, I'm sure, on this call today, who are so-called second generation and relatives of those who have perished. I remember I served on the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation Survivor Testimony Committee. And I remember sitting in the first meeting, and we went around the room and asked, we were given our story. And I remember saying that my grandparents had died in Auschwitz, in Sobibor. And I remember quite clearly Ben Helfgott hitting the table so hard that everything jumped off the table. And he said, they didn't die, they were murdered, and never forget it. It's a very important word. However, one has to look forward, and what can we learn from the Holocaust and other atrocities? I myself have visited Auschwitz, which is something that I and others who visited will never ever forget. The sheer size and scale of the place is quite frightening, quite absolutely frightening. And of course, it was one of about 15,000 concentration camps around Europe at the time. Many, of course, were not death camps. I found visiting Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Center in Jerusalem, equally moving. We now have a Holocaust Memorial Center in Washington, and of course, a very poignant one in Berlin. So where do we go? How can we learn? We read every day that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Racism is on the rise, Islamophobia is on the rise, not only in this country, but around the world. Look what happened in Texas only a few weeks ago, or less than a few weeks ago, a few days ago, murder or attempted murder by an Englishman, an English Muslim. However, I think we have to look at hope for the future, and I think there is hope for the future. I think in numerous ways, education is the key to this. And with the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation, an education centre, not a memorial, sorry, as well as a memorial, should I say, but an education centre is being built in Victoria Gardens next to the House of Lords. That will have huge significance. People are learning the fact that since the year 2000, we have a Holocaust Memorial Day, and there are so many events taking place. Reynolds has given a few of them. I will be at one of them tomorrow. My deputy lieutenants will be attending others. That in itself is very significant, and the number of people who attend these events is growing. I think the one thing that I am particularly heartened about is here in Hertfordshire, we are an extremely diverse community. We have one of, if not the largest, Jewish conurbations in the whole of Europe, in and around Hertsmere. But we also have 36 other practicing religions. We have 2 bishops. We have an archbishop of the Coptic Church. We have an archbishop of the Coptic Church. We have a large Muslim community, a large Sikh community, a large, obviously Protestant and Catholic, a large Hindu community. We have the Bhaktisiddhanta Manor, one of the largest Hindu temples in southern England. And I think it is that diversity that is our strength and is the main hope for the future. The only way, and I've said this time and time again, the only way we can understand each other is to learn about each other's religion, about each other's ethnicity, about each other's history. It's the lack of understanding that leads to horrendous prejudice, which we've seen in the past. So I'm hopeful. We have refugees still today. In Hertfordshire, we have harbored a large number of Afghan refugees, something I and others are particularly proud of. And I believe that we will see a positive future. I think it is up to us, it is up to educators to ensure that people understand and learn about each other's backgrounds and religions and ethnicity, as I say. And that to me is very important. Tomorrow, I have the great honor of joining the Chief Rabbi in Hyde Park, where we're planting a tree for the Queen's Green canopy, but also sponsored by the Association of Jewish Refugees. And I'm absolutely delighted to see that the ambassadors of both Austria and Germany will be attending that very poignant ceremony. I've had the honor of placing not the tree, that's the Chief Rabbi's honor, but a time capsule into the ground tomorrow. And it's a time capsule that will hopefully be looked at in many years to come, and people will have learnt that a mere generation later, here we are with the Chief Rabbi, with Her Majesty's representative, with the ambassadors of Austria and Germany standing together, and with many, many others, planting a symbolic oak tree in Hyde Park, one of the royal parks of our great city. So I'm absolutely positive that if we work together, we educate, we teach the young, and never, ever, ever forget the horrendous stories we've heard. It is our duty, everybody here and the next generations and the next generations, to ensure that the stories are passed on, that they are never forgotten, and that hopefully lessons will be learned as we move forward from the horrendous Holocaust and genocides that we have seen. So I thank you very much for attending this evening and hope we can move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And to everybody, thank you for coming. If you get the chance, maybe you can light a candle to the memory of those we lost. Thank you again for being here. I've been Reynold Rosenberg. Good night.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Reynold.
Thank you, Marina.
We had some problems with the internet, so I hope that it has been recorded. So I will get it later. But we came back at a certain moment.
Good.
Thank you, Reynold. Thank you very much.
I should say before you all